Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. We have an incredible guest today. I've been looking forward to this conversation, MJ, for, I want to say a good several years, but since we actually discussed that we're going to be talking a few months. We have MJ with us. MJ will introduce herself to us, but what I do want to point out is I've known MJ for several years at this point, literally more years than I knew her. I initially thought I'd met her just a few years ago. Turns out those few years was about 10, which was surprising to me. She's a regulatory attorney. She works for a direct-to-consumer healthcare company. She is a health IT lawyer, and whatever that means right now, because that group is blowing up right now. Everyone's talking health IT. We're seeing that in 19 different formats, whether you're discussing telemedicine, whether you're discussing technology, like hardcore technology. There are a few different ways that pops up. MJ is the person to go to.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast. Regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.
So MJ, tell us a little bit more about what you do right now.
Sure. So I'm at a direct-to-consumer health tech company called Row. It is a startup, although we're growing very rapidly. But
that's part about it.
Yeah, right. That does mean we're a small group of attorneys, so we all are tasked with wearing many hats while we're growing. I came in with a purview over FDA regulatory matters. The company sits in a space where we offer technology and offer services, access to services through that technology. So there's our pharmacy services where you can purchase prescription drug products. And then we have our medical services where we are affiliated with a physician network who are able to provide patient care and also prescribe medications that can be purchased through our pharmacies. So lots of FDA regulatory matters, healthcare regulatory matters, basically much to consider. It's technology, so considerations in privacy, how we manage access to information, and keeping our business structure where it needs to be in order to continue to operate in this space.
So I'm going to start with some basic sort of introductory questions, just to, for lack of a better term, demonstrate what a badass you are. And I can say badass because it's my podcast. But why do you think you know a little bit about the FDA? Talk about these things.
I used to work there. So I've been interested in FDA regulatory matters for a while. I started my career out of undergrad, and then I was in grad school when I had landed my first role at a clinical research organization. And that's when I really became interested in the regulatory landscape for how we market healthcare products in the US, which we can geek out on all day. It's super fascinating. And we've been the model for so many different foreign countries on how we do things. And then it's constantly being tested, right? It's changing, it's evolving. We have a reactive regulatory landscape for drugs. And so that was my first fascination with it, and ended up going to law school, still sticking with that interest, and coming out of law school, going to a firm, being in their healthcare, life sciences practice, focusing on FDA regulatory matters. And then my, FDA invited me in. That was a great opportunity to learn how the agency approaches regulatory policy development, how the agency prioritizes enforcement, how they think about compliance, and just being a part of that and being able to work with stakeholder groups to develop regulatory policy was also a really great opportunity, and not to mention the tremendous public health mission of the agency, which I hat tip right now during COVID, where they've been working overtime to churn out guidance. I think it's truly amazing. But that's kind of my background in FDA regulatory.
Well, you mentioned that, and I'm going to say there's a little bit more. So I'm going to explore that a little bit more, if you will. One of the biggest things around access and the mission of the FDA is making sure that medicines are accessible to people, medicines that you can trust, medicines that are safe and efficacious. Tell us more about your experience in ensuring that products that come across are how do you ensure that products are dependable and safe and efficacious, and how that impacts a direct-to-consumer healthcare company?
Sure. So my role at FDA was in compliance. So for us, it's protecting. Sorry, my computer's doing something funny. Coming right back. Protecting that model. So the FDA has its approval pathway. There's a lot of nuances to that pathway and how drugs come to market and are proven safe and effective. Which drugs are funneled through that process. On our side, it was enforcement. It was looking at doing a sort of surveillance, sometimes participating in inspections. We talked about that just a few minutes ago before we hopped on. So the boots on the ground aspect wasn't my primary role, but got a chance to see how that works while at FDA. In the direct-to-consumer space, I don't know how much background I should give your audience on.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
So the way FDA sort of has a hold on being the gatekeeper for medicines is based on how the drugs are marketed. So the word marketing is really loaded in the FDA universe, like how you what you say about what your product does, what you purport to for customers or patients, the way they intend to use it or how you intend them to use it is really important. Back prior to the late 90s, you weren't permitted to market prescription drug products direct to consumers. You didn't see your TV advertising of drug products when you go overseas. You also don't see that because we're one of two jurisdictions that allows that. So it's a very unique space to be able to have patients participate in their healthcare in that way. And I think it's an interesting ability that feeds into this whole concept, what I call health tech's focus is democratizing healthcare, giving patients more ownership and participation around how they receive products and services or healthcare products and services. So the marketing piece or the direct-to-consumer marketing piece is really an important part of that. And I think it's an interesting space to sit at a telehealth company that offers you direct-to-consumer information about prescription drug products and a telehealth platform that allows you to access physician care. So we're kind of giving you the whole suite of a digital clinic where you go to, but also are equipped with more background information about what services you're requesting and asking for, rather than just walking in a door and being at the stake and mercy of whoever wants to usher you in a particular direction.
So let's sort of play that out a little bit more. One of the things, and I'm going back 20-something years, I remember when online pharmacies became a thing, and you had that VIP certification, and we still have VIP certification. The question we start dealing with is, how do you ensure that a specific pharmacy is trustworthy? How do we make sure the product that comes from that pharmacy is something that I can believe is safe and efficacious and can come into me? One of the things we face is, bringing products in from Canada and the reimportation of drugs. And there's a whole thing going on with that, as we all know. But Canada, in that specific instance, the FDA is taking steps to manage that process. In certain other situations, people are talking about importing drugs from Mexico, from India, from China. And there have been, shall we say, less than efficacious results from those products. How do you ensure in a DTC company, when you, as you put it, democratizing access to medicines, how do you ensure that the product itself is something you can believe in and trust, and that the appropriate product gets to the appropriate person?
Right. I think there's a number of ways to approach that. For us, is running our own pharmacy or operating our own pharmacies where we can control the supply. So we do work with reputable suppliers. One big announcement we made recently was that we're working directly with Greenstone, for example, to provide branded Viagra Pfizer provides the branded Viagra. We're working with Greenstone to provide the generic version, and that's the generic arm of Pfizer. So we're getting it direct from the manufacturer. In other cases, we're offering the same drugs you would get from your big brick and mortar pharmacies. We don't work with any different suppliers than they work with. So we're making sure that we're working with a reputable supply chain. we don't run, so that helps us avoid those issues that you might face with other online pharmacies. I think it's harder to see the failings we would see of the online marketplace that we saw 10 years ago. There are certification bodies, like you mentioned, VIP. There's also LegitScript. They help with monitoring for these things. So you're able to, as a consumer, look for those trusted marks like the LegitScript certification or VIP certification and know that, hey, there is some third party who's looking closely at these operations and given some assurance that what I'm getting is hopefully something that's not been re-imported or not manufactured to U.S. standards. It's also something I dealt with at Amazon. Amazon did pretty well in the drug space in terms of making sure that certain medications that weren't manufactured to U.S. standards were being presented in its marketplaces or in its stores, which was a hard thing to manage given the number of third-party sellers that are on the site. But having that, working with that third party to comb through the site, making sure everything's up to par in terms of what was being offered. Similar third parties that we're working with currently at Roe helps to lend an added layer of assurance to purchasing drugs online. There are many mail order pharmacies you'd see, despite the criticism or skepticism of that industry leading up to now, we also understand the criticality of it during COVID and the need to have this avenue available to access prescription drug medication. And so we were happy to be a trusted player in that space coming into this pandemic.
So that really raises and again, I just want to make sure we have this disclaimer, just in case anyone wonders, not legal advice. You aren't representing the opinions of either Roe or Amazon or the FDA or the last law firm you worked at, but this is just general conversation between two people. Whoever's listening in, you're just lucky enough to listen in. So having put that disclaimer in there, what stops me from saying, you know what, Amazon is trustworthy. I'm a pharmacist. I'm going to open up a pharmacy on Amazon and you can send me a prescription. I'll send you the medication through it.
I think right now is how you validate that prescription on a site that's not set up to validate prescriptions or to validly transfer prescriptions. So luckily, although it's a hodgepodge of pharmacy law around the nation, there are laws that regulate, a number of state laws that regulate how a pharmacy is able to validate a prescription. So that would be the biggest hurdle to doing that, to setting that up on a platform like Amazon. I just don't think they're set up for that right now. They might be working on something like that as part of their healthcare initiative. But as a third-party seller or third-party pharmacy, they're just not a platform that you can go to and do something like that. And as if you try to market a prescription drug on the platform, from what I remember of how the compliance tools work, you wouldn't get very far.
So what you're saying is systems like Amazon, systems like Roe have methodology in place to validate how the prescription comes through and to make sure that the prescription itself is legit.
That's where health technology comes into play. That's all the things that are feeding into that. What are the processes? How do we mimic the in-person or typical pharmacy experience through our technology?
So talk to me a little bit about what kind of technology, obviously I don't need names, but what kind of systems enable that to happen? What's out there to make sure the patient can trust what's coming out?
I wouldn't say that it's basically sorry, I'm not going to be the engineering expert here, but from a patient standpoint, you're getting access to your physician. There's a closed portal for that. We take privacy very seriously. So there's like a closed universe through which you communicate with your physician. Similarly, the way our systems speak to one another. So the doctor is able to prescribe within one system. That prescription is able to transfer to another system in a closed universe so that we can validate the prescription. Our pharmacists are able to validate the prescriptions before filling on those orders. So all of those pieces that are governed by various state regulations are built into the tool. So our engineering is always iterating with our lawyers and pharmacists to figure out what needs to be in place to create a valid prescription or to to surface to them a valid prescription. And on the other end, similarly with the physicians, it's not just the prescription piece. The big piece of what they're doing is the patient care piece. So how do you mirror visit to a doctor through technology? And it sounds simple. Sometimes the lawmakers oversimplify what that process looks like, or telehealth through asynchronous telehealth, where you're not necessarily live chatting with the physician or even a phone call, but you're able to have that patient physician interaction online. It takes a lot of thought. It takes talking to our physician advisors about what this should look like, what kind of information we need from patients to inform decision making, and it's iterative. And so what we also focus on is making sure we're focusing on the right conditions to treat through telehealth. Not all conditions are right for telehealth services. You don't want something that it really the benefit of having certain conditions through telemedicine also enables in-person care to be focused on what needs to be in-person care. So some things you might, certain conditions like our linchpin, erectile dysfunction, when you're experiencing symptoms, you might not want to talk to your doctor about in person, or it might not feel like it warrants a visit, or it might be the afterthought of a visit. Maybe you have other reasons you don't want to have a face-to-face communication about something like that, but you're able to get physician care, meeting the patient where they are through technology.
So you talk about telehealth, and you talk about the unique opportunities it provides, because it provides patients the opportunity to go, you know what, I don't want to meet someone face to face. I'm shy. This is something I'm not really looking forward to talking to someone about. What are the unique challenges that, from a compliance perspective, telehealth has raised for you, and what are some of the lessons you've learned?
Right. I mean, there's a number of challenges. I do want to caveat that the last point was there's not necessarily anonymity. You still have to like that the person who's coming to you for services. So there is some privacy. Yeah. So some of the challenges are, number one, I mentioned the regulatory hurdle of being able to provide services in the way that are easiest to access for patients, which are typically asynchronous. Some states require a face-to-face or video visit. Some states require a telephone call. We kind of look at these as potential barriers to access for some, especially where there's different divides. For example, like if we're providing services asynchronous, it allows for people to not have to rely on healthcare providers' work hours in order to access those services. So you could have a lag time between a need that you have and when you're able to access a provider for feedback or for a visit, or not have to take off work in order to have that visit. It enables patients to reach out whenever it works for them. So that's one. Our general counsel, Adam Greenberg, he also wears a government affairs hat. He's been really effective at working with different lawmakers to sort of help remove barriers to access for our patients. The direct-to-consumer piece is also interesting, getting it right. Being a marketing counsel, it has its challenges. Trying to have the right voice and tone about healthcare. If you look at us and compare us to competitors in our realm, you'll notice differences in the approaches. And so it's interesting, even with this space that's becoming quite crowded, you can see like, okay, this one's known for this and this one's known for this. We really try to focus on patient trust and approach marketing in a way that builds trust, especially for people who haven't tried out telemedicine before or maybe skeptics, making sure we're offering an authoritative voice with our physician advisors or medical affairs group, trying to really provide responsible information responsibly. So you definitely will, although we're not drug manufacturers, when we surface information about the drug, we're thinking about fair balance, which is a tricky space when we're also using social media and Instagram stories and influencers. And so what drug information looks like takes on a new meaning there. So we're constantly, staying on top of FDA guidance and what they're focusing on, as well as FTC feedback in that space. The other side of it is, the pharmacy challenges. Operating a mail order pharmacy in the U.S. is not without significant challenges. Similarly, you have a hodgepodge of states. Not only is it different in terms of you have to contend with 50 plus state boards, but they have like different personalities by region. So you have some regions that are more welcoming to telehealth. You have some regions that are more protectionist to the smaller brick and mortar. And I think what we'd like for them to understand is like the opportunity space. We don't exist to put out of business the smaller operators because they're an important piece of this. Just like we don't exist to replace in-person patient care for conditions that require that or there's a need. For some conditions, that absolutely makes more sense. We're intended to be a complement to that. And similarly in the pharmacy space, I don't think mail order pharmacy is going to replace all your pharmacy needs. We don't do controlled substances, for example. There are a number of complications that come into the mail order pharmacy space if you start to bring in the controlled substance piece. But for the conditions we do treat and the medications that we do offer, it absolutely makes sense to have that cohesive experience as a digital clinic. But there are definitely regulatory challenges across the board and in the health regulatory space, looking at how we operate, how we work with our physicians network, how we make sure we vet the online visit services that we provide, making sure we're staying within the standard of care in terms of mirroring that experience in the digital space. All of these are challenges, so we're constantly on our toes.
So I'm going to ask a question completely out of curiosity. You talked about using health influencers and sort of online influencers. Obviously, as you know, the FDA has its own concerns about that. We'll have a different discussion about that another time. But the question I had was, let's say they make a referral and they it takes you to a landing page and they put in the information. From your perspective, do you see them as patients who reached out and therefore subject to HIPAA? Or do you see them as people who are reaching out to a website and therefore not subject to HIPAA, and therefore the privacy elements don't kick in the same way? I guess what I'm really asking is, from a health tech perspective, how do you view the person reaching out to you?
Gotcha. So, we definitely have terms of use and policies before you sort of enter our ecosystem for patient services. So you might be able to see marketing information before that point. And we're not collecting information from you before that point. But once you enter into, say, an online visit with a physician and sign up for services, then definitely privacy concerns kick in. I do want to caveat that we don't take insurance, so we're not a HIPAA covered entity per se, but we do take privacy very seriously. So we almost operate as though we are in terms of where we think about patient information being given to us, making sure we're disclosing to patients how their information is going to be used. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but in terms of like where it kicks in, I think it would be at the point where they avail ourselves to their services, regardless of how they came to our website.
Thank you. That was actually, because I was just curious, I was exploring that thought before, not sure it played itself out. I was going to ask, we've been talking a little bit about the general sort of, like you mentioned Greenstone and you mentioned generic, sildenafil, let's just call it that. You mentioned sildenafil. My question is, what happens when things get more complicated? What happens when you're talking about compounded drugs? Does that add a dimension of complexity? And what does that dimension, what are some challenges you face with compounded products as they're being shipped across various lines?
So I think the challenges with compounding, well, I will say it's not, we own, sorry, let me back up a bit. So we offer access to compounding services, and we work with third-party pharmacies that are compounding pharmacies. And So if a physician prescribes something, right now we're focused on topical medications for skin. If they prescribe something based on the individual patient's need, we're able to have that prescription go to a compounding pharmacy, and then they're able to fulfill that medication order. The challenges are, let's say, they're not much different in that space. I mean, you're talking about fulfillment of a prescription order, so there's nothing unique about what we're doing in the compounding universe in terms of it's text. The physician's prescribing, they're getting the order, they're filling the order, and they're shipping it. So I don't know how common it was for compounders to ship medication. I know that gave rise to some issues that sort of ushered in new regulation. The broad reach, I think we're sort of walking into a discussion on what happens with the MOU and what happens with broad-based shipping of compounded medications, but that's really to the extent this is sitting with another pharmacy, that is something we're paying attention to, because it does impact our ability to offer continuity of care to patients that come to us, to know that they can have access to these pharmacies and be able to sit in different jurisdictions and not worry about, is my particular personalized medication going to be able to come to me? So right now, there are a number of regulations that apply to compounding pharmacies. The one that's a big focus right now is whether the state that the pharmacy sits in is going to sign an MOU with the FDA to not have to limit the number of medications they can ship outside the state. So that's something, I don't know, we don't control the answer to that. That's a state-based decision, but it's something we're closely monitoring.
Awesome.
I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges right now I foresee.
Well, I'm thinking that we're going to have another conversation at some point for what those challenges look like.
Probably.
MJ, this was awesome having you on. Thank you so much. Love to have you back again.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.